this idea of progressing your proximity to failure week to week in combination with sets. Like, to me, I tried that, and I would love to get your input on this, because when I logically look back, I'm like, man, that is just a massive increase. If you're doing maybe one set for RIR or two sets for RIR, reps in reserve. Yeah. So yeah, I'm saying that right? Like 4 reps in the tank, right? And then next week, we're going to do 3 sets. So you're not only adding an extra hard set, but you're also adding the proximity to failure. So now it's 3 to 2 RIR, assuming that you're good at gauging that. That's the other thing, right? And then that just gets more and more as the weeks progress. Like, if you're doing it in this kind of linear fashion and you're not being smart about how you auto-regulate it based upon how you're feeling and all that good stuff, right? Is that increase just seems like a ridiculous amount? No, like to me, maybe you can. It just seems like too much. Like,
no, I think it's
for naturals.
It is a well, I think for most people probably. So
okay,
a couple things there, and this is something we wrote a response, like a letter to the editor regarding. Like, I know a lot of people think like RP, like their model is always adding sets, and I think that's not always going to be their model, So I think people tend to see this snapshot of what someone might be, promoting in terms of a method and assume that's what they always do. And I know for a fact that's not the case. Yeah, if you're under recovered or you're making really good progress, maybe you don't increase a set. So I definitely, respect the thought process behind it. But, like we said, anything in the fitness industry, people get an opinion and they assume it's like this individual has a polarizing view on this, and they are not considering anything else. So, one thing I've promoted in the past is the utility of using, maintaining an RIR across a mesocycle. Maybe you do an intro week around like a 3, and then, the rest of the block, maybe you just maintain like 2 RIR for each set. It's not that I think that's necessarily better than accumulating or like getting closer to failure each week. I think that can be equally as effective. Let's say you go from 4 RIR to 1 RIR or 0. It's like in the end, like you're averaging out to about the same. So I bet there's a pretty negligible difference, if any. But one reason I do like the idea of maintaining RIR is it's just easier to gauge like progress, because it goes back to that discussion between progression and progress. Am I able to do an additional rep today because I'm better recovered, or I've made positive forward strides in my capacity, have I made actual adaptations and I'm better recovered, or is it because I'm simply just pushing a rep further and getting 1 rep closer to RIR? So I think it's easier to compare apples to apples that way. But again, I don't think it's necessarily more optimal. And there's going to be, different exercises that suit different progression models better than others. But,
right.
With regards to adding sets, adding a set is like, it's a bolus of stimulus, it's like progressing, adding weight, adding reps, depending on the rep range you're using. One of those could be a greater increase in stimulus than another. If I'm talking about like a lateral raise, like if I were to go from 25 pounds to 30 pounds, that's going to be maintaining the same reps. Like that's going to be a pretty robust increase in stimulus and would require a pretty robust magnitude of adaptation to accommodate that, So
right.
That's why, those lighter movements progressing in reps before load is oftentimes going to be the way to go. So when it comes to adding sets, I think some people believe that, okay, again, it kind of goes back to this inverted U, this sweet spot in terms of progress, or like think of like the minimum effective dose, anything in that inverted U that's essentially above the x-axis could be considered like above the minimum effective dose. And we're trying to kind of hang out in the middle. So some people think like adaptations occur enough at a rate that requires an additional set in order to continue to stay in that range. And we just don't adapt that quickly. And we know that for a fact, because if that weren't the case, nobody would make progress without adding sets every week. So it's definitely, I think there's a time and place for adding volume. in adding sets. I mean, as you progress throughout your training career, especially from like a novice to intermediate, you're going to require more volume to progress. I mean, you take a novice, they could do one set twice a week and make progress, and so it's eventually you're going to have to add sets. But as that window closes on your rate of adaptation, as you get more well trained, that's a much more aggressive increase relative to your capabilities than it is for someone like a novice. So I think there's, if you're trying to develop your work capacity and, the goal is to do more work, that's one way to certainly do it. But if the goal is hypertrophy, it's by no means required. And I would side more with hanging out kind of in the middle for most of the block, rather than going from 2 sets to 6 sets, maybe ramp up to 4 and maintain it. And it's not required. And I think that as you get older, kind of tie back to the theme of this with longevity, as you get older, like the sustainability of this training is going to be pretty important. And I know that particular model, it's like if the last week of the mesocycle rolls around and you have poor sleep or work is crazy, and it's like your preparedness and recovery has taken a hit, it's like you're applying the greatest stimulus at a time where your capacity to adapt is the worst. So it doesn't necessarily align with people's levels of capabilities to recover. It can, I'm not saying it doesn't work, but I know for me there's been much more volatility. Like it's not like a linear, like, okay, this is what I can recover from, and then by the end of the block, magically I'm at my greatest capacity to handle this, So yeah, I mean, that's basically in a nutshell. I mean, I think we look at different training interventions, on paper, and okay, what makes sense, like it would, like what we understand about muscle physiology and about hypertrophy. There's a lot of things that can make sense on paper, but then when you plug that into a training career, things look a lot different. And I think that's why, like, this is an important topic, the longevity of this, because, for example, like there's some research that shows, out of Brad Schoenfeld's lab, that showed some muscle groups up to 45 sets a week, hard sets a week was, they saw positive increases in hypertrophy up to that point, So someone may take that and be like, whoa, I mean, if I want to optimize hypertrophy, 45 sets is better than 20, then maybe but like it's an extreme example. And, another thing to point out, in that study, they trained 3 times a week. So, I mean, that gets into a different topic, like allocating volume across a week. But, that's one thing, like, that's just not a sustainable level of effort. And then you add it into the context of a very like comprehensive program, and your ability to recover, like your joints are probably going to hate you after a while. And so, across a training career, if we can, in those studies, for example, I forget what the low end was, but there's a wide range of set volumes that people can see positive progress within. And so with that being said, like within a cohort of a study, with that being said, there's no reason to believe that adding a set is necessary to keep pace, So it's a wide window, and it's finding that sweet spot, on average, where you can see progress over time. And if you're getting stronger, maintaining the same technique, with matched effort, then that's that something good is happening, if that's consistently occurring. And, I think the longevity side of it, like for me, I simply wouldn't even have enough time to train like what may be optimally on paper to implement that. So am I just going to say, okay, well, what's the use? Or am I going to say, okay, let's do something that's sustainable. That way, in 5 years from now, I still enjoy this process, and, I've still accrued a lot in the bank in terms of progress and muscle growth. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of what I'm trying to say with all this. In certain parts of the scientific community, some debate in terms of the role of hypertrophy and strength, but it's one of those things that's hard to tease out in research. But you could theoretically be losing muscle mass and get stronger if your neurological gains are